I go off of how much I enjoy the book and that this was one of my best reading months ever. I would not say to pick this one up. This book honestly did give me Midsummer and Coraline vibes. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Rochelle. I read a variety of books and I also have a disability, and today what we're gonna do is talk about all the books that I read in the month of August. Now before I go into all the books that I read for the month of August, I just kind of wanted to leave a little disclaimer and go and mention that just because I go and say that I had a really good reading month or a really bad reading month and include the numbers, in no way is that meant to shame anyone for the amount of books that they read. If you just read one book for that month, you did an amazing job, because guess what? You read a book, and that's all that matters. No matter how many books someone reads, don't go and take that upon yourself to feel awful about whether you read less or even more than that person. I think what matters is just the fact that you read the book, and especially if you enjoyed and loved that book so much. So I know that there's always conversations out there about shame on whether or not you read enough books that month or didn't read enough books. I think personally for myself, what comes down to whether or not a reading month was good or bad isn't necessarily the number, but if I enjoyed those books that I read. So during the summer, I was in an awful reading slump, and to be honest, the reason why it felt so bad whenever I was doing my monthly wrap-up was because I felt like I didn't have a lot of books that I read that I even enjoyed. So it didn't matter what the number was. There were no books that really hit for me, I guess, if that makes sense. So for the month of August, even though I read more books than I have in quite some time, the reason it was a really great reading month for me was because so many of the books were almost 5 stars, and I actually did have one 5-star book that I read. So let's go over the 9 books that I read in the month of August. So in August, I read a total of 9 books, and because I really love looking at the amount of pages that I read a total of 3,404 pages, which is just absolutely wild. I'm not a number gal, but looking at numbers in that way just kind of scratches an itch for me and makes me so happy. So the average amount of time that it took to finish my books was around 8 days or so. I did have a few books that actually carried over from the month of July, and I just wasn't able to go and finish them before the month ended. And I also listened to quite a few audiobooks while I was reading, which also helped with the amount of books that I finished as well. So around 33% of the books that I read were through print, and then 22% were digital books, and 44% were audiobooks. And the average rating I had for the books I read was 4.11. So that's why I'm honestly saying that this was one of my best reading months ever. And it's because I just enjoyed so many of the books that I read. And it just made me so excited to kind of get back into reading again and getting past that horrid summer reading slump that I had. Let's go and start going through the books that I read, going from lowest to highest. I actually did have one book that I DNF'd this month, and that was A Fairy Hunter's Guide for the Recently Undead by Cynthia Prith. So for this one, I had actually picked it up, I think a few months back. I had received the ARC from NerdFam, and I was trying my hardest to go and read it, but something about the way the book was written just wasn't vibing with me. So I was like, you know what, we're gonna do a soft DNF and pick it up later. And then for August, I was actually doing the full moon readathon that Jan Agaton runs, and I was like, you know what, this book actually works for one of the prompts on the spider card, so let's go and try to read this again. And I tried reading it. I actually decided to listen to it as an audiobook, and Nugget's kind of doing some business. I tried listening to it as an audiobook, and it just did not work for me. I was trying my hardest, and I think I got to around 30% of the way through the book, and I had to make the executive decision to just hard DNF it. It just wasn't working for me. I felt like it was adjective vomit, and I mentioned this I think, in one of my vlogs that I'll post up here. I know that description sounds really mean, but it just was such a hard book for me to get into. There was just so many descriptions and everything that it took me out of the story. I couldn't really even understand who our characters were, what was going on with the setting. So this was a book that I DNF'd. It just didn't work for me, and although I was so thankful for the Nerd Fam letting me read this arc, I'm so sorry, it just wasn't a good fit. The next book that we're going to talk about is Stranger Danger by Maren Stoffels, and this one is a novella, and I actually read this one for my summer bingo board because I needed one that fit for a novella. But this one I actually rated 3 stars. So for this book, I honestly thought, looking at the description on the back, that it was going to be a book about these high school students that were kind of stranded in a farmhouse and a whole horror situation about someone that was watching them and like kind of picked them off one by one. This honestly was not that book at all, so if that's something you're looking for, I would not say to pick this one up. The only reason this book was 3 stars for me was because it was so well written that it really kept me interested and locked into the book that made it difficult for me to put it down. But the premise for this book is basically 3 kids decide that they're going to go and stay in this farmhouse. I want to say for a week, but I'm not quite sure. They are needing to go and study and lock things down for their exam. They're really wanting to make sure that they go and pass so that they are able to successfully graduate and then go on to their respective plans after high school. But the whole thing is they're not allowed to have phones with them on this trip. So they're kind of completely stranded in a way without contact to the outside world, aside from a landline phone that is there. Before they're able to go on this trip, one of our characters, Lotus, actually gets a weird message from an unknown number on her secretive phone. And so she's so bothered by this, she ends up going and bringing that phone with her on this trip without telling her other 2 friends. And it turns out each one of the friends that's there has secrets of their own. So you're trying to go and figure out what exactly is going on and who this unknown number is. And honestly, it maybe was a thriller, but there were a few other things that just kind of felt so high school, but also completely unbelievable for this book. So I think this is actually going to be a book that I end up unhauling because I don't think I'm going to have the desire to reread this book. But I did really enjoy the writing style that this author had so much that I might go and see if I can use Libby to read the other books by this author as well, just because I'm a little bit curious. Then the next book we have is Chaos and Flame by Tessa, Gratton, and Justina, Ireland. I actually picked this one up because a few friends that I have on booktube run this readathon called Draconathon, and I really wanted to try my hardest to try to participate in this event. And I read this book, which actually fits for the Rebel card, which is a book that kind of has like war or something like that, but also has dragons involved in it. So for this one, I actually rated it 3.25 stars. So for this one, I actually rated it 3.25 stars because I listened to it as an audiobook, and I really had a hard time paying attention to the storyline and what exactly was happening. With this story, we're kind of dealing with a bunch of different houses and wars and politics in it. There's a house called House Dragon, another house called House Kraken, and I want to say there might have been another house called House Phoenix, but I don't think we got to that one too much in this story. This is a series. I'm not quite sure if it's a duology though. So because I can't really remember too much about what this book is about, I'll just read you a little bit of the back just so that you get an idea. It says, House Dragon murdered darling Seabreak's family. She owes her life to both the power of her Chaos Boon and House Kraken for liberating her from the sewers where she spent her childhood hiding. So when her adoptive Kraken father is captured, Darling vows to save him, even if that means killing every member of House Dragon. So with this, basically, Darling is trying to go and get her adoptive father back. However, she gets captured by House Dragon. And there's a little bit of romance, there's some politics there. There's secrets and different mysteries and things like that. I feel like maybe if I would have read this book physically, I might have enjoyed it more. However, listening to it as an audiobook, like I said, I was kind of pulled in and out of it, but I think part of that led to the fact that I just really wasn't in the mood for fantasy books, and so I struggled a little bit with reading this one, especially because of the fact that I picked this one up after reading a really good thriller, and that was kind of what I was in the mood for more so than a fantasy book. Then the next book that I listened to as an audiobook was The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. I think part of the reason that this book bothered me was because when I look at the cover, and there's kind of different renditions of the book cover, so I'll leave a few of them here so you can see them. The cover was a little bit misleading for me and felt very much along the lines of a very strong, fierce woman that ends up going and fighting in the war or something along those lines. That's just the vibes that the cover was giving me, and that really wasn't what the story was about. So our main character is a princess, and she's going to be going through an arranged marriage. However, she really doesn't want to go through with it. Something that she's always wanted is to be able to fall in love organically and not because of an arranged marriage. So she kind of plans on going and running away with one of her friends, who I think is like one of her servants or something along those lines, and they run away to this town where her friend has connections. However, it seems like she's being pursued by two different people, one of which is identified in chapters as the assassin, but we're not quite sure which one of those guys that's pursuing her is the assassin until towards the end of the book. And it kind of seems like for a while there's this love triangle. Our main character is trying to keep things hidden that she is a princess. So she's kind of pretending to be a commoner and things like that, and also convincing others that she's capable of going and doing hard work and doesn't need to be waited on. And there were a couple of really cool concepts with this book, but overall I just didn't enjoy this book because I honestly thought it would be about something completely different, and that is why I rated this one 3.5 stars. The next one I read was an audiobook. It was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This was actually my first ever Riley Sager book, and I absolutely loved it. I believe my boss was actually someone that recommended this book to me because she had such a great time with it, and I was really curious and decided that I should go and pick it up, especially since there was no waitlist on it through Libby. So for this story, our main character is a caregiver. However, she hasn't been able to find work after being blamed for her mother's death. And then suddenly her boss goes and finds her this position to be a caregiver for this older woman. But the catch is this older woman is basically blamed for the death of her entire family. So our main character is a little bit uncertain and very nervous to go and take care of this woman, especially knowing that this woman could be the reason for her entire family being dead. But basically no one is able to confirm or deny if this older woman did anything because she's not talking. So our main character is going and taking care of this older woman and learns that she will go and communicate with a typewriter. So slowly our main character is getting a little bit of the story and piecing together facts, but there's also some weird things going on in the background, one of which the older woman is saying could be her sister. So there's a few different mysteries in here, and honestly a twist at the end that I didn't see coming, but really, really enjoyed. I also loved the fact that a lot of the mysteries, for the most part, were wrapped up at the end of the book, which is one of my favorite things when it comes to thrillers or horror stories. I really love when there's not an open ending and nothing's resolved and I'm left with a bunch of questions. That's probably one of my biggest pet peeves. So I was very happy that I didn't experience that at all with this book. And then our last audiobook that I read was When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. And I rated this one 4.25 stars. I absolutely loved this book, and I'm 100% planning on reading through Nat Cassidy's backlist. I loved his sense of humor because he was one of the people that narrated this book as well. I think he only did his author's note and maybe the content warning page, but the way he wrote it and the humor he had was so good, and it was the kind of humor that I just love so, so much. So it tickled my funny bone, which made me very happy. But our main character in the story is kind of a failed actor. She is kind of, she's trying to go and pick up various jobs, but nothing is really working for her. But for the time being, she's working at a diner and kind of has this situation where there's a weird customer that's there, and they end up going and having to clean up some stuff in the bathroom, but get pricked by a needle that is left behind. So she has a little bit of a panic attack and leaves work because she's sick and heads straight home. Well, while she's heading home, she stumbles upon a little boy hidden in a bush. And she's like, I don't know where your parents are. Just come with me, we'll go and figure things out. But while she's home with this little boy, things get worse. And suddenly she hears an argument outside, and turns out one of the people out there is a naked man who is the father of this boy. But he turns into a wolf. So throughout the story, we're basically following the main character who is trying to keep this little boy safe, but also herself safe, as that wolf seems to go after them everywhere they go and leave nothing but death around them. It was such a good book. It was so interesting and different compared to anything that I've read before. I loved the ideas behind it and everything, especially reading the author's note and what inspired him to write this story. I thought it was so good, and this is definitely a book that I would recommend, especially in audiobook form, because it was so enjoyable to listen to. The next book we have is Hollow by Taylor Grothe. This book I was actually on the street team for, and had meant to read this book a lot sooner, but just hadn't had the chance to do so. This book reminded me a little bit of not only Midsummer, but also Coraline. So our main character, Cassie, has moved away from her childhood home, and for a couple years she's living in New York with her parents. But unfortunately, she has a huge meltdown that basically she blames as the reason that her parents split up and why she's no longer in contact with her dad. So her mom and her move back to her hometown, and while there, she tries to go and reunite with her childhood friends who she basically feels like she abandoned because she never continued ties with them, kind of ignored their messages, only vaguely talked to them here and there. While trying to reconnect with her friends, she learns that they're going on a hiking trip, and she would love nothing but to go and join them. However, she's not quite sure that they trust her or even think of her as a friend anymore, and she's not sure that they'll ask her to come with. But her friends decide to extend an olive branch and bring her on this trip for all of them to go and reconnect, especially before the school year starts. Cassie is kind of dealing with quite a few things, such as learning that she is autistic, and also dealing with trichotillomania, which is something that she has dealt with to kind of relieve a lot of stress and anxiety she gets in certain situations. We also learn that this character is pan as well, and kind of realized pieces of her sexuality with one of her friends before leaving. That friend is feeling very betrayed by Cassie and isn't quite sure if they can go and trust her again. I really loved a lot of the representation and how well done it was in this book, especially the trichotillomania piece, as that is something that I very much struggle with as well, and I have dealt with since elementary school. So with the lived experiences that I've had with trichotillomania, this was actually the first book that I've read that has that representation. I really loved how well the author did with representing it and how accurate that was, because it did talk about it in certain pieces, and I was nervous that it would trigger my own, but it was so well done, and I just was so thankful for that piece. So going back to the story, Cassie is going hiking with her friends, but the hiking location that they're going to, a lot of people tend to disappear and go missing. No one ever returns. No one can ever find them. And so Cassie's mom is very reluctant to allow her to go on this trip, but Cassie goes and convinces her with reassurance that if anything goes wrong, she'll contact her. Well, while they go on this trip, everything seems all fine and dandy. They all seem to be getting along, but Cassie goes to bed and then wakes up, and suddenly learns that people left. There was a huge fight and people are gone. So while trying to stumble and find them, she comes across a weird community, and they give these really weird vibes, but the one person that is there seems to be super friendly and makes Cassie feel more seen than she has, especially since learning about her autism diagnosis. And so she's kind of seeing these weird pieces that are showing up in front of her, but at the same time thinks that she's being paranoid, she shouldn't second guess things, and she should just let things be. But also she's a little bit worried because there's a huge storm coming and her friends are still out in the woods, and she knows that she needs to go and look for them, but at the same time feels so safe in this little community that could things really be going wrong? So like I said, without going into too many details and giving any spoilers, this book honestly did give me Midsummer and Coraline vibes. So if either of those things are stuff that you enjoy, especially with the horror and eeriness, I would highly recommend this book, but also keep in mind it is YA, so it might be a little bit creepy, but might not be super terrifying since it is YA. Then the next book we have is Where He Left Me by Nicole Baart. I got this one as an ARC from Atria. This one will actually be out November 4th of this year, and I rated this 4.5 stars. The beginning of the story was very, very, very slow, and there were certain chapters that took me out of it because we are dealing with present day, but also dealing with flashbacks, and the flashbacks honestly pulled me out of the story. But once I got to around the middle portion of the book, things really started picking up, and it just got so good that I had a very difficult time putting this book down, which is why I decided to go and rate this one 4.5 stars because of how much I enjoyed this book at the end. With this book, our main character, Sadie Sheridan, and her new husband, Felix, go back to Felix's childhood home, Hemlock House, because he has a work project that he needs to do, and Sadie's also working on writing a book, so they think that it would be a great idea to go and leave their current home and go somewhere a bit more secluded so that they can go and focus on their respective projects. Well, it turns out Felix has a work trip and Sadie's expecting him to come home, but as the clock ticks by, he doesn't show up, and Sadie is finding that she can't get a hold of her husband, and she's kind of left alone in this house that kind of gives her a bit of the creeps. She tries to go and see if anyone in town knows about what happened to her husband, or if they can go and help find him. But no one's taking things seriously, and there's also a storm that is on the way. So Sadie goes back to the house, and she's trying to see what she can do to figure out what happened to her husband. However, turns out there's also some other people that are there on the mountain with her. And I'll leave things there without going into details. It was a bit of trapped in the mountains, survival-esque type of things, and it was such a good book. I really loved it, and honestly, I think you should put this on your TBR because, as I said in the beginning, this comes out November 4th, so just a few short months from now, and I think this would be a great book to read, especially during the winter time. For our second to last book, I have Heartless by Elsie Silver. This is the second book for the Chestnut Springs series, and possibly my favorite one that I've read so far. I really loved Rhett and Summer and Fearless for our first book, but I think Cade Eaton and Willa might be my favorites and might be pushing those other two characters to the side. I absolutely love this. I wasn't quite sure when I started this book if I would like Cade Eaton, because in the first book he kind of seemed like the grumpy, standoffish brother, and I do enjoy grumpy characters, but Cade just kind of seemed like one that I wouldn't really be excited for. However, the love interest Willow was someone that I absolutely adored, and so I was intrigued to see how things would progress in this story. So Cade Eaton is a single dad. He is the oldest brother out of his siblings, and he's kind of had to go and do things on his own and rely on himself. However, he's learning that he needs to have a nanny for his little boy because a lot of the people that were taking care of his son are too old and kind of have their own things to do. But Cade is realizing that his son needs a nanny that can go and take care of him while he's busy doing work before he can come home at the end of the day and spend time with his son. So reluctantly, he decides to look for a nanny, but no one seems to be a good fit. All of them kind of seem like they're coming on to Cade, and he really doesn't want that. He's not interested in romance or anything like that. So Summer decides to go and recommend her best friend Willa, and has the guarantee that neither of them will fall in love with each other. Perfect fit, everything like that. Well, in comes Willa, and things don't necessarily go as expected. Willa is kind of in between jobs and has the summer free, so she decides to go and accept this position as a nanny, especially since her best friend also lives in this town, so she can see her whenever she wants. She doesn't really have experience with kids at all, but finds that she absolutely loves this little boy, and Cade is seeing how much the little boy loves Willa. And slowly, their attraction seems to go and develop into something else. I loved this book so much. I love the banter. I thought it was great. However, once things kind of got to the spicy portion, that's when I got a little bit turned off by the book and wasn't invested in it as much, and why I didn't rate this book 5 stars and rated it 4.75 stars instead. I really did love it, but the spiciness just wasn't for me because of some of the moments in it. I just didn't vibe with me as well, but I did love this one so much, and I can't wait to read the other books in the series as well, and also visit a lot of other Elsie Silver books, because I think I'm really loving her writing style and just the stories that she builds. They are quite nostalgic for me since I grew up in a small town and also lived around horses, so those stories just really give me so much nostalgia and are very enjoyable. Then the last book we have is The Guest House by Robin Morgan-Bentley. I absolutely love this book, and it was actually a 5-star book for me. At first when I was reading it, I wasn't quite sure if I would rate it that high, but I had a hard time going and putting this book down. I couldn't stop reading it, and I just ultimately enjoyed it so much. I know a lot of people that rated this book on Goodreads rated it a little bit lower, but reading is subjective, and I go off of how much I enjoy the book and not necessarily how the writing style is. So that's why this one was so high for me. With the story, our main couple, Jamie and Victoria, are going and having a little vacation before their baby is born. They've dealt with a lot of infertility issues, and Victoria is finally pregnant, and so they kind of want to have this one last couple trip for both of them before another human is added to the mix. So they decide to go and visit this little guest house that is very close to where they first met each other. However, when they get to this guest house, the couple there is a little bit weird. So this house kind of seems a little bit like a bread and breakfast, and the couple is a little bit odd, and we're getting both flashbacks of moments that happened in the past at this guest house and also moments leading up to this guest house, as well as present day. And we're learning through some of these flashbacks that something happened to the baby, but also the owners of this house were very strange and are sending very cryptic letters that they cannot tell anyone what transpired at this guest house. And I'll leave things there. I thought this book was so good. There was also cerebral palsy representation in this book as well, which I found out later through the author's note that this is something that the author deals with as well, and that makes sense why the representation was so well done in this book. I really thought this was so good, and like I said, I had a very difficult time putting this book down. However, if you have struggled with miscarriages, infertility, anything like that, maybe go and check your trigger warnings and how you're feeling before going and reading this book, because it could be something that could be quite triggering for you. Those were all the books that I read for the month of August. I enjoyed my reading month so much, not because of the amount of books I read, but just by how many amazing books I was able to read and actually enjoyed and didn't just drag through. So in my eyes, not because of the numbers, but because of how many books I enjoyed, that is why August was such an amazing reading month for me and makes me very excited to see how the month of September goes. I can't wait to see what books I pick up and how my reading journey is for the month of September. But if you made it to this point in the video, maybe go and leave a guitar for Heartless if you don't know what to comment but would like to show that you were here. As always, I appreciate you all so much for being here and talking about books with me. It's been so fun, and honestly I feel like I've been talking for a million years right now, so I'm gonna wrap up the video here and say always remember that you're worthy and capable of amazing things. Bye friends.